presented to us. And so again, we thank you, especially if you were here with us last week. We look at this program as definitely building and a kind of cumulative process. And so we are grateful for you all sticking with us for the long haul. So for tonight's session, it'll look very similar to last week. Those of you who were on the call last week, we have figured out the breakout session feature. So we will have that kind of toward the end of our session. But the majority of our time tonight will be spent hearing from someone that many of you probably know, Lamisha Whittington, who is the campaigns director for the North Carolina Black Alliance, as well as the deputy director for Advance Carolina. I will allow her to give kind of a fuller introduction of herself in a few moments. But we hope that this time is enjoyable for you. We hope that you learn a lot, and we hope, especially as we move into those breakout sessions, that time to kind of really hear from one another about your experiences of redistricting and gerrymandering and the way it's impacted you. We hope that that's both the point of connection and just kind of deep resonance for you all as you are getting to know one another. We do invite you as well, as you kind of come in, to introduce yourselves. And what I'm going to invite you to do is just kind of share your name, if you are with an organization, and which county you are in. Do that in the chat. So your name, your organization, which county you're from. And we also want to remind you that that chat feature is also available to you if there's certain questions that come up throughout. We will be monitoring that. We will also have a time toward the end of LA's presentation for Q&A. So we encourage you to hold those as well. But we will go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and pass it to LA. So let me just shift here and spotlight you, and we will get started.
Thanks, Reggie. Thank you. So good evening. Just such an honor and a pleasure to be in this space. And really, I was really disappointed that I couldn't join last Thursday, but heard that it was just a very full and encouraging, uplifting, but also deeply informative session, and just really deep appreciation to the folks that have really built out this program, Code Red. So thank you to Reggie, to Yolanda, to Stacey Carles, to Attorney Jessica Holmes, and many other folks behind the scenes that, I don't want to miss names here, but just really great to be in the space. I will save, excuse me, I will save time with just doing full, introduction of self. As Reggie already stated, my name is Lamisha Whittington, the community named me LA, so either is fine. Again, campaigns director with NC Black Alliance, deputy director with Advance Carolina, a former redistricting fellow with Blueprint, trained close to half a decade ago and considered a North Carolina redistricting expert. I don't consider myself an expert, y'all. Ever learning, ever changing. We're seeing these laws coming out every day, these bills being introduced, and the landscape is always changing. So we're learning together. And so just really honored to be in the space again. I've had the distinct privilege of being able to be trained in Mississippi under Southern Echo, who you'll hear about in a little bit in my presentation, and how they are some of the founding fathers and mothers who created fair redistricting that many of the states, including us, are attempting to follow. And so definitely an honor to have been mentored by members and leaders of Southern Echo. And so again, great to be here. I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. So I definitely love, interaction. And if folks have questions, I'll be pausing at some points to ask folks questions, to ask if some of the things I need to elaborate on, if I need to back up. So you'll kind of see some interactive points in my presentation today. I want to make sure, I know, last week, there was already introductions around North Carolina Black Alliance and Advance Carolina, but I definitely want to elevate it in the space again for folks that are new to the call this week or didn't hear this part last week. So the North Carolina Black Alliance is a 501c3. It is formerly, many folks may know it as the incubator for Black electeds, as it was an association for Black electeds years ago, and it still is. Our member organizations, intergovernmental organization of legislators, municipal officials, county commissioners, school board members, and community activists, we are still accountable to those members. We hold an annual summit. We just convened our first virtual summit. For nearly 20 years, it was in person, but because of the pandemic, we were, required to shift things around, and had a really successful virtual summit, and hope that some on the call or everyone on the call was able to attend. And if not, I believe there's some recordings that may be up. And so for us on the 501c3, it has to be a nonpartisan. So we don't endorse or promote any candidates because we legally cannot, but we work with community members, community advocates. And our goal is to be a conduit to information from what is impacting the community, what are our legislators, our local electeds, what are you facing, and how can we connect the two bodies together, the constituents and the governing bodies. And so we create programs. And so our commitment statements and issue areas are around environmental justice, economic justice, criminal justice reform, and voter education, and, you know, building that political and economic power. Advanced Carolina is simply just the C4 arm. It's a sister org, but it is the organization with the bite. So we can lobby without a cap. If we so choose, we can endorse candidates on this side, and we follow the community when it comes time to endorse. So we don't just endorse candidates, right? We work with our Black caucus, we work with our already established incumbents, Black electeds, but if the community is like, hey, this is who we want to endorse, we support those candidates by endorsing them through a county table model. And so really honored to be in service to both of these organizations and in service to my community. Okay, so redistricting, here we go, y'all. So last week, y'all were able to hear a deep dive with Attorney Holmes and and Attorney Carles about, you know, the census and the connection. What I'll do is in 3 buckets today. So we're going to cover a pretty good amount of information, and don't worry, you will receive this slide deck following the call. Reggie and folks will send it out with the rest of the materials, and you'll be able to take more time, put it more bite-sized, look at the documents I have attached. I have my citations. So the lawsuits I'll mention, they will be attached. The bills that I'll mention, they'll also be included. So you'll have time to look at that, even though we're going into kind of 3 sections today. The first section is some of the historical grounding. We may have already heard that before, but I still like to preface with that to make sure that everybody's on the same plane as we're moving forward. Second is how did the lawsuits and what was happening in community shape what we're dealing with as a state today? And then third, how can we tie in your issues that are happening on the community, whether that's, you know, the need for deeper economic development and business support, or if it's environmental injustices and the fact that many of our communities are dealing with health disparities because of COVID-19, how does that all tie into redistricting? And so that's the third part, is tying in redistricting with issue areas. So the title of my presentation is We Paved the Way. And it's you know, very specific reason I say we paved the way is because we really created the model by which, gerrymandering. This country has not always favored, we know this, our success as a people. And in order to impede our success, gerrymandering became a tool to stop our political power. So let me back up a little bit. So our history, redistricting and Black electeds. So only 5 years after the end of slavery, Afro-Americans were winning elections across the nation, namely in North Carolina. It is recorded that our state elected 187 African Americans, okay? That was within 30 years of emancipation, okay? Shortly after the Civil War, we were already electing scores of our own electeds across the state, local leaders, all the way up to the congressional level. This is what we did. We didn't have to go through the training of, we knew what we were doing. We literally got out, accumulated 15 million worth of acres of land across the nation. And in North Carolina, we did the same. And on that land, we elected our own people. And so we were building political power and economic power, right? And so that was scary for this nation and the folks who didn't want to see us in power. And so in Reconstruction in North Carolina, there was a district that was created called the Black Second, okay? So due to the success of Black Americans winning elections, again, as I said, a congressional seat, the party in power determined to redistrict us into a single district and several single districts, but this main one is the Black Second. So they packed, and we'll talk about the term packing and cracking, and if folks are familiar, great. For others that are not, don't worry, we're gonna talk about what that means. It's just a way to gerrymander. It's just a type of gerrymandering. But they packed us, a majority of us, Black residents from northeastern and coastal counties into a single district known as the Black Second. And so this effectively diluted our power to be able to vote across the state, right? And especially in the East, in different districts, because we were packed into one district, which means we could only elect one representative for congressional seat. We could only elect a limited amount of county and state officials as well. So they diluted our power, right? So in Reconstruction, this was one of the first specific targeted racial gerrymandering that targeted us to impede our political power and our ascension that was rapidly happening. Well, as our people, we are resilient. And we didn't take this lying down, right? And so for many years, being gerrymandered, even though it did impact our congressional representation, we lost one of our major representatives in Congress due to this law, right? Due to the gerrymandering and the restructuring of the district. Still and yet, this fueled the fight through Jim Crow into the civil rights movement. So when we talk about the fight for civil rights and voting rights, we have to remember that the civil rights movement was in large part a response to disenfranchisement. It couldn't be unpacked. So it was human rights, it was economic justice, but it was also voting rights to get us to that economic justice, to get us to that political power, to get us to that representation for our own communities. That's why these two were coupled, but it was also litigation and legislation. So it was the protest, but the protest was matching the legislation. So that's the power of having the appropriate people elected, right? Was that we can write legislation to say, well, we need fair voting rights. We need to make sure that Black districts and minority districts can't be targeted. We need that into legislation to become law so that we won't be disenfranchised and discriminated against again. And the community poured out and protested, as we are all very well aware of what that looked like in history. And many folks on this call were a part of that history, right? And so I want to give honor to that. And so SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was founded in, here in Raleigh, where I'm based, at Shaw University in 1960. And so they used the slogan of one man, one vote. So if we've heard that slogan, or we're already familiar, or folks here was a part of the creation of that slogan, then you're already aware that it was a call for equal representation in redistricting and voting. It was the call for fair maps, y'all. That was our quote. So we were already, we had already redistricted fairly, and then they stopped us, gerrymandered us. We were already creating campaigns that said, we know what you did, and we know you try to outlaw our people. So guess what we're gonna do? We're gonna create a protest that combines human and civil rights with the voting rights. And you're going to allow this voting rights to go through. That was a part of that movement. And so that impetus, and of course, we know the trauma, the tragedy that befell on many of our people, the bombing of the Church on Freedom Summer in Mississippi, that was the catalyst for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act to pass, right? And so we're very well aware that in the media, at least I hope folks are, that this is elevated a lot because it has been used in a lot of litigation recent years to win and push back against discrimination in our voting maps. Okay, so we're hopefully folks are aware of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But this Voting Rights Act gave the federal courts, the federal government, the authority to require states to prove, okay, are your maps racist? And these states would have to go through what we call pre-clearance, and they would have to show their maps. They would have to, take the population, like we're already talking about, draw their voting maps, and they would have to prove that they did not intentionally target Black communities. And if they could prove it, then of course that's how you could make sure you were compliant and not violating the Voting Rights Act. It protected us from that discrimination, right? And so that's what that was. The least common known litigation and legislation, rather, that became law is Baker versus Carr. This happened at the same time, simultaneously. And in this case, the Supreme Court gave protection to the idea of one person, one vote. Now I want y'all to let that sink in, because SNCC and the coordinators in SNCC and the faith leaders and the local electeds and the community folks created that slogan. That slogan was actually written into law in the Baker v. Carr legislation that became, again, law. And it was given to the Supreme Court, this idea that passed one person, one vote, by ensuring states would have to redraw districts based on population changes, right? And so Baker versus Carr cause a lasting impact on future state redistricting cases by giving federal courts the right to weigh in on state district cases. So what I just mentioned, this gave the right for the federal courts to step in and intervene if the state was found to be racist. And this was because of our mobilization, not anyone giving it to us. We fought for this and we won it. So to step forward, I've already pretty much explained the Voting Rights Act, but this is here just for reading purposes and to just restate for folks who are visual learners as well as, you know, auditory learners such as myself. And so again, the VRA, as we call it, of 1965 is a landmark piece of federal legislation in the United States that prohibited racial discrimination in voting, allowing state legislatures to create majority-minority districts. So here again, in this moment, this is a second part. So the first part I said was the federal courts could intervene if a state was found to have discriminated against us and packed us. But what about if we need to be protected in a district? Wonder if we need that protection because we deserve representation, but our population numbers aren't vast enough. What does that mean? It means that legally, your legislatures can legally create a majority Black district to make sure that you still get representation. So as long as you legally do it for the benefit of your voters, it doesn't violate the Voting Rights Act. It actually is allowed because you're creating that opportunity for political power and representation for Black communities, right? So that's different than if you were targeted for being Black and they want to dilute your power. So both of these measures, both of these incidences are a part of the Voting Rights Act, all to protect, again, Black and now brown communities. All right, so this is my favorite part. We have looked at, of course, the historical impetus, right? We came right out of slavery, and the first thing we did was accumulate land, build cities and towns, y'all. We literally built Black towns in over 24 states. In North Carolina, we had 2 Black Wall Streets, and I would not be surprised if I find more in my research. We had one in Durham and Greenville. We owned Black beaches. We created the Shag. There was Wilmington fusion politics. We know about the massacre, but we need to know about the power that they built that led to that massacre to give them honor. There was also a kingdom in North Carolina in the mountains, the Kingdom of the Happy Land. That's where I'm from. And there was this actual government. You can Google it, the Kingdom of the Happy Land. That's what we did. And we elected our own body of electeds. We did our own redistricting and we elected our own representation. And then they stopped us, right, by gerrymandering us so that we couldn't continue to do this. So we just covered this. We just covered what the Voting Rights Act is, why it was protested on behalf of, and what SNCC and other activists did in order to achieve this historical legislation. Now, what did local champions do with the VRA once we won it, right? The fight didn't stop, neither did the representation. So again, I mentioned Southern Echo, and this is in the picture here, just a few pictures, a collage from a movement. And Southern Echo is based in Jackson, Mississippi. And so they created, first Southern Echo was found by Hollis Watkins, who was a youth member of SNCC. So he learned and others learned about redistricting and how to draw their own maps while they were in SNCC. So they didn't just talk about it, they actually learned how to draw their own maps, right? And so you may hear a helicopter in the background, excuse me. Okay, it's a big military chopper, y'all. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. It's pretty large. So anyway, so SNCC, they not only spoke about this slogan, they actually learned how to redistrict, draw a Black voting population so that they could speak, truth to power and say, we already know how to draw our own districts. So we know if you're discriminating against us, we know if these are fair maps. They knew the math. And so Hollis Watkins passed on this legacy when he found Southern Echo, along with Mr. Leroy Jackson, who was a youth at the time of the founding of Southern Echo and who is my mentor today. And so they created the redistricting model that achieved success for the entire state of Mississippi. In one calendar year, they used the Voting Rights Act, and from 1991 to 1992, they doubled the African-American caucus. It was unlike anything the whole nation has ever seen before in one calendar year because they knew how to use the Voting Rights Act. They literally went to every single county in Mississippi and met with community members and did a listening and hearing tour. Are you listening to me? But I hear you listening, but are you hearing is what they would say. And they would listen to the problems of the people then connect those problems or issues of the community and bring back this revolutionary way to draw maps. And they would teach the community how to draw their own maps. And they worked with local electeds to do it. And they won fair redistricting in Mississippi. Well, of course, this upset a lot of white folks in Mississippi, right? We already know. But this is the power that they were able to do locally as an organization, but with local electeds, to transform the African American caucus, but also to add Black electeds in their state level legislature, okay? The same thing happened in North Carolina. So when we're talking about local redistricting, which is, I know what everyone is focusing on as you're walking with us today, we'll learn more as the training progresses. What is local redistricting? How, you know, can you really do local redistricting in a way as a not only a community member to hold your electeds accountable, but also to work with your community member, your local elected governing body, to say, here's my public comment, or this is my opinion on this map. But this is an example. So Robeson County, and I'm not sure if Mr. Angus Thompson is on tonight, but I believe he was on last week. And so I want to give honor to Attorney Angus Thompson and many of his litigation team from years ago. And so due to the heroes, the local champions like Angus Thompson, they were able to sue, right, have litigation and deep community organizing in Robeson County, where they achieved fair redistricting on all three levels: the school board, local city council and commissioner, state legislature, all the way up to congressional. And what was written, what they won, is they had to have on the local level one Black representative, one Native American, and one white representative. They had to have a equal, right, portion of representation on the boards because their community was so diverse. This is a win and a success that hasn't been seen by North Carolina since, and it was a rural community who did it. Right. And so this was because the power of the people, the power of Black litigators, Black educators, and working with brown community as well and allies, they were able to achieve this and win fair redistricting so that children wasn't going to segregated schools, right? They had a fair school maps. That's the kind of things that would happen on the school board district. They did the same thing on the county commissioners and the city council both, and they were able to achieve fair zoning and making sure that folks weren't being gentrified. That was the plus of fair redistricting, of having a representative that represented each of the population, the demographics. And so Robeson County is an example of local success, and one that we should study and see how we can apply it to today, even though the Voting Rights Act looks a little bit different, which we'll talk about a little bit later. One of the other local cases that I mentioned here, you'll be able to look at it later, was an NAACP versus City of Statesville, where there was a challenge, and I know Attorney, again, Thompson was a part of this litigation team, to challenge that local governing body on whether the districts had discriminated against Black folks, right? And so I believe they won that case. And I want to make sure to stop here to see if there's any questions so far for a moment. I think it's just folks dropping in the chat. Okay, cool. So I'll continue. So these are just some examples of local wins by local champions that's even happened in our state because we won the Voting Rights Act. So what I want to ground for a moment before we go into studying the types of gerrymanders that we need to look out for, especially as local electeds and local community members, I want to ground that not only did North Carolina elect 187 Black electeds only 35 years after emancipation. Not only did we do so much that it inspired them to gerrymander us, right, because they had to stop us. Not only did we create a whole entire campaign that began at Shaw University in Raleigh, and we came up with the very phrase and the campaign that was then enacted in the Supreme Court for redistricting to be fair and the Voting Rights Act to be won. North Carolina also won fair redistricting on all three levels. I want to ground who we are in this space. Right? That's the thing. It's nothing new to us. It's just reclaiming it, y'all. It's just reclaiming it. So that's why I appreciate the folks that are on this call, because we're a part of that reclaiming. And so the Black Second Revisited. So, you know, I already mentioned the Black Second District before, where they gerrymandered us at the top of Reconstruction to impede our ability to, you know, elect folks across this state that would represent us. Well, really, I call it the revisitation of the Black Second when the Voting Rights Act was gutted. Again, they saw we were doing too much, y'all. Robeson County won that fair redistricting. We saw our folks in Mississippi were revolutionizing and transforming representation. Again, like really almost a mirror in a way of the Reconstruction era. We were rebuilding political power and they had to stop us, right? I'm just going to put it really plain language. And so when we look at the Voting Rights Act being gutted, in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down a key component of the Voting Rights Act. The impact was immediate. So let me unpack a minute what happened to the Voting Rights Act. Okay, so the Voting Rights Act is still there. But if you recall what I mentioned at the top of my comments here, is that states had to get pre-clearance, right? They had to prove that their maps were not discriminatory against Black and minority districts. They had to make sure that they were not packing us, cracking us, or diluting our power and basically, you know, impacting our vote. They had to prove it, and the federal courts could intervene. The federal level could intervene if it was found to be discriminatory. Well, the sections that were gutted from the Voting Rights Act removed that pre-clearance, y'all. So basically the argument was racism is gone. It's over. You know, we're healed as a nation, and we no longer need to watch if the states are doing the right thing by their Black citizens. That was basically the argument in a nutshell. Racism is over. We don't need pre-clearance anymore. We trust you states. Do your thing. Draw your maps. You've got this. That was the whole point. Well, guess what? As soon as the Voting Rights Act was gutted, we saw across the South, across the nation, but definitely the US South, the impact was immediate. So 2 hours, y'all, after the court's decision, Texas made the public announcement that it would move forward with its redistricting plans and voter ID law. Now, you know, many folks have opinions on the voter ID laws, and so we'll save that argument for here, but we do know that voter ID laws impact Black communities and brown communities, right, in a disparate way. So to see them couple both voter ID and redistricting plans paints a very nefarious picture. So this was the immediate reactions to certain states, from certain states to the Voting Rights Act being gutted. They're like, okay, let me introduce the maps that I want to introduce, and let me also introduce this voter ID law now that I no longer have to prove, or I'm being watched by the federal government. I'm no longer in the principal's office, so let me do what I want to do. That's basically what they did. So North Carolina, 3 weeks later, followed suit. They followed Texas' lead, but here we go with its own controversial voter ID law. But this was a foreshadow of what was to come, okay? So not only did we, 3 weeks later, introduce the big monster voter ID law, we also were found, here we go, a couple of years later, 6 elections later, federal judges find the 28 North Carolina districts unconstitutional for racial gerrymandering. So wait a minute. I thought racism was dead. We no longer needed the pre-clearance in the Voting Rights Act, y'all, right? That's what the nation said. But here we go. North Carolina took that opportunity to do what? To discriminate and do exactly what was done at the top of Reconstruction era and gerrymander us into certain districts to dilute our power, right? And so this was found. So we had 6 elections under these discriminatory gerrymanders and 28 districts. And so that was the impact of that Voting Rights Act being gutted. That was why it was there and needed to be there. And that is what happened as soon as that pre-clearance was removed. These are just photo examples of some of the previous gerrymanders from kind of that era, even that's just a few years ago. And we're seeing kind of just some interesting shapes here. We'll talk about shapes here in a little bit, but we're seeing District 12, which was the former congressional district at that time for Congresswoman Alma Adams. But we're also seeing District 1 and 4. And so we'll begin to unpack a little bit what this means a little bit later, but it doesn't look too good, right? There's a reason for it. And so again, we were found guilty for racial gerrymandering. And I'm going to check the chat one more time. Okay. Hey, Chester, good to have you on. Good to have you on. So this is just some of the gerrymander timeline. This is not full comprehensive. Again, you'll get documentation, but I don't want to go into the weeds of timelines that y'all will already be studying on your own. I want to leave time for the other sections, and that's also to have dialogue and discourse about what we're hearing here. And actually, before I go into the timeline, are there any reactions so far to where we are in this moment? The Voting Rights Act, I know many folks are already familiar with that, but folks who are maybe coming into this information for the first time, are there any thoughts or reactions in this moment before I keep moving? Okay. All right, so hearing none. So we're going to go forward in the gerrymander timeline. So to ground here, we hear the words redistricting and then we hear the word gerrymander. So let me make sure that I'm making a distinction for, again, plain language sake. So redistricting is the legal action. It is what is supposed to happen, right? Every 10 years after the census, it is supposed to track population. So if you have new population moving into your state, the census is supposed to track that population, and you could receive a new seat like we did this year in the U.S. House during apportionment. But that population data is also used to redistrict to give us our voting districts and maps. And the local electeds here on the phone already know this very well, because I know this is what you do, you know, in your service is do the redistricting. Gerrymandering is the evil twin, as I call it, of redistricting. Now, I don't say illegal. Bear with me for a moment. Gerrymandering is the evil twin. It is to use, the political party uses its power, the party in power determines that they want to either keep their power and entrench themselves, so they gerrymander a district so they can't be voted out, or they gerrymander to dilute the people's power so that they, again, can't be voted out. So gerrymandering is the evil twin, but it's not necessarily illegal. It is only illegal if it's discriminatory on the basis of race. That's what the Voting Rights Act did. That's why it was so revolutionary, is that made sure that gerrymandering was illegal if it was discriminatory based on race. However, partisan gerrymandering is not illegal, y'all. Partisan gerrymandering, if someone decides to draw a map, and we know that has happened for our state here recently and through the years we've been fighting, and many other advocates, you can gerrymander a party based on party affiliation or the voters based on their party, and that's not illegal. It's egregious, it's bad, but not necessarily illegal. So I did want to make that distinction. So here's some of the timeline, not all of it. So we saw in, again, 2011, lawmakers announced new legislative district maps. These were already concerning. But then when in 2013, that Voting Rights Act was gutted, that ushered in a whole new slew of problems for us to fight back against these discriminatory maps. There were incredible organizations, many that will be in my citations that you'll be able to read about their lawsuits, from NAACP to other like actual citizens who waged a fight against the state and against, at the time, Republican lawmakers. And so the North Carolina residents sued the state in 2015. They also sued leaders of the Legislative Redistricting Committee and the State Board of Elections, alleging that lawmakers packed African-American voters into 9 Senate districts and 19 House districts. So this lawsuit was the impetus for us being able to achieve that ruling that yes, 28 of our districts were absolutely racially gerrymandered. So this is the timeline of those lawsuits, but there were many, right? There were many different lawsuits, and it was a lot of back and forth in the courts, right? You had to go to the state Supreme Court, who then ruled, 3-judge panel ruled, okay, yes, it's racial gerrymandering, but then here we go to the US Supreme Court, who then gives it back to the state courts. It's a lot of back and forth, a lot of back and forth. The issue with the back and forth is, obviously, we want to give, honor to the champions who were suing and litigating in order to fight against these racial discriminatory maps, but elections were still happening, y'all, under these maps. So at the same time we're fighting discriminatory maps, we're still holding elections under these discriminatory maps. So let's think about the deficit that many of our communities may be in due to voting under egregious, racially discriminatory, illegal maps, and even partisan maps, right? And so that's what was happening at the same time of such litigations. These are some of the names of the lawsuits from Shaw versus Reno, which was back in the 90s. Again, that'll be attached here for everyone to read, to also know that it was both parties. Both parties have been guilty for gerrymandering. So when I mentioned the Republican legislators in the previous slide, I also want to ground that Democrat legislators have been guilty over the years as well of holding on to power and gerrymandering. So we've seen both, right? The scales, unfortunately, being imbalanced. But these are some of the lawsuits that you all will be able to have and to research and read through if you haven't already, to know the landscape of what has been fought and won, and what has been fought and pushed back, right? In terms of where we are today. The impact previously of those maps that we just were discussing in this moment, the impact of those gerrymanders and those 28 districts. These are not updated numbers. These numbers reflect that same time period because we want to show the impact of those 28 districts being racially gerrymandered, right? So here we saw a few years ago under those racial gerrymanders, but the voter registration, Democrats were 2.64 registered. Unaffiliated was 2.05. 6, and Republicans were 2.055. So let's ground the actual who was registered. These are registered voters at that time, right? And so in 2017, but let's look at the House. The Democratic Party only had 46 seats compared to the Republican Party's 73. How is that possible? Gerrymandering makes that possible. In the Senate, the Democratic Party had 15 seats to the Republican Party's 35. Again, gerrymandering and us voting under those gerrymandered districts in 6 elections is what made this reality come to fruition. This is what it looks like in real term on the impact on the people. No matter how many registered voters are affiliated with Democrat, unaffiliated, Republican, we see Democrat was 1, unaffiliated was 2, Republican was 3rd, but who controlled the majority of the seats in the House and the Senate? This is the result. This is the impact. So to pause right there, again, are there any, let me look in the chat for a moment. Okay, hey, Amanda, this is good information. I'm interested in how we can apply the strategies used in Lumberton and Statesville to fight for fair redistricting. Oh, I love good conversation. So let's hold on to that, which is why I want to read it out loud, because it's exactly where you all are, in this Code Red training is all about local redistricting. Right now I'm given the state landscape, but I made sure to mention those local wins because it is possible. It depends on strategy. We have to really think about how the Voting Rights Act has been gutted. We also have to think about redistricting for us as a state is in our Constitution. And in our Constitution, it is written that only our legislators can draw their maps on the legislative and congressional level. It is written that local level, so our city councils, our school boards, our county commissioners, they are responsible for drawing their own maps. So we also have to make sure that we're working with our local electeds who hold the constitutional power to draw these maps, but that's the power of the people who are the constituents working with the local electeds to achieve the maps that that all of you know you need in order to have a fair, thriving, economic prosperous community. So I appreciate that question, and we'll get to that later in discussion. So here's some rules to redistricting and how to draw, right? Hey, Jessica, thanks for this. I'm gonna read something from Attorney Holmes for a minute. Very informative presentation. Local elections matter. So many people focus on the federal level, but school board, city councils, and county commissioners have more of an impact on our day-to-day lives. Thank you for that. That's exactly it. So when we're thinking about rules to redistricting, when we see the terms guidelines, it means that it is not written in the Constitution or in stone that this is what your legislators, your electeds have to do, but it is strongly advised that they follow these guidelines. So some guidelines are in the Constitution, but when we say this, some of them are not. So let's talk about some of the guidelines so that we're aware in this space as we're moving forward to look at what's some bad gerrymandering. We need to be aware of what's good redistricting, or at least elements of good redistricting, to identify what is bad gerrymandering, right? So when we're talking about some of the guidelines, you want to make sure that your area is compact. So your county level, your county maps, your school board maps, are they compact? Do they show compactness? And that generally just means a district in which people generally live near each other. So if you know that there are, I'm going to use this as an example. If you know that there are an entire 3 or 4 neighborhoods of folks who are registered Democrats, right? And you know that your city is already comprised of based on where people live, are you paying attention to how folks are compacted together? Are you splitting them apart or keeping them together based on their interests? What is better for the people? And are you taking in consideration where your people live and are they in proximity to each other? Sometimes the shape that's associated with compactness is a smooth perimeter. Now, again, shape doesn't always determine if it's a good district or not. I tried to ground that before, but it can sometimes be used as a guide to know if it's a bad version of compactness or a decent version of compactness. Other elements is contiguity. So redistricting statute, this is an actual statute, which is why I have it here, that mandates that districts have to be unbroken. They have to be a single shape. So you can't just, draw a corner here, skip over a county and draw a corner here and say that's a district. You can't do that. And so that's a mandate, right? And so that's pretty bad. That's pretty obvious, but it has to be contiguous, right? So two areas touching at the corners are simply not considered, they're not considered contiguous. Like I said, you have to make sure it's continuous and an unbroken shape. Equal population, some of these are pretty self-explanatory. All districts must have equal population. I cover that with what elements that SNCC elevated, the elements in the Voting Rights Act. This is a continuation of that equal population. Preservation of existing counties and political communities. Again, if you know that your area has a certain demographic of registered voters, then why not keep those voters together when you know that their common interest will be the same, or their representation might look the same or need to be the same, right? And then the fifth, which is what I really, really love when it comes to talking about redistricting, and I really want everybody to write this down: communities of interest. Communities of interest. This is extremely important as we are talking about navigating, well, how do we protect Black communities if the Voting Rights Act has been gutted? Like, it's still there, but if we're trying to think of creative ways to litigate or to draw maps, how else can we use what already exists to protect Black and minority communities? One such way is communities of interest. This can be a community that is bound by a political party affiliation. This could be a community of firefighters, of teachers. This could be a community that, and this is how I use it, and we'll talk about this later in the presentation, how to connect your issue area. This is where you can use that. Communities of interest. If you all have a corporation, like for example, a really bad environmental corporation that's been making everybody sick, it's been really creating bad health disparities in your community, that is a community of interest because you are bound by the interest of pollution. You are bound by the interest of needing better economic development. You are bound by the need to clean up an area, which means your local electeds might need more funding from the state budget and allocation to clean up contaminated waters. It might mean that your local budget, you need more resources to create deeper pathways for schools to update their infrastructure. If those are impacts that come from being in proximity to a corporation that's creating environmental contamination, then you're a community of interest. And so that's a different way, and we'll talk about that more, but please write down that term because it's one that we're navigating. Oh, okay, thank you, Michael. So the 5-term definitions seem to be what we want to strive for locally. Yep, again, these guidelines, and I elevate the 5 out of the 7, racial fairness, I really want to elevate. I've been talking about racial fairness the entire time, and partisan fairness is a part of that because we know that partisan affiliation is sometimes perfectly in alignment with a race, and we know that oftentimes data speaking, statistically speaking, more Black communities are registered Democrats. So we need to be both partisan fair and racially fair. But you're right. So the preservation of communities' interest rounds out my 5. And so these are some of the guidelines. Again, they'll be there for you to study and to look over. This is just an example. Again, the map at the bottom, it is showing how you can make an area compact. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with this map. I haven't looked at the math of this map to tell you if the deviation is right. I'm not going to tell you, so I can't give you the data to say this is absolutely perfect map. But what it is showing is it is better in compactness than this top map. Right? So we can see that. This squiggly line, again, District 12, that I mentioned earlier, that was former district for Congresswoman Alma Adams. That district packed over half of our historically Black colleges and universities into one district, y'all. It's one district. Many people are probably already aware of that, but that diluted the students' power, but that also connected cities up to 3 hours apart. So you had Winston-Salem, Summit Greensboro in the same district as Charlotte and Kannapolis. Okay, so that it absolutely is an egregious example of bad gerrymandering. This is bad gerrymandering, right? And this is what was found guilty as well for bad gerrymandering. Well, this is an example that someone took of showing us what it would look like to be more compact and fair and not just cutting cutouts of the state, right? So this is just an example of what that could look like if you optimize, number 1, compactness. So to go forward, so we've spoken about the history. we've grounded in space examples of what is the difference between redistricting and gerrymandering. We've also explored, right, just the cases a little bit of what is the timeline of the pushback of Supreme Court, the fact that, 28 districts were found to be racially gerrymandered, but we still had 6 elections under those at that time, more since, but 6 elections. So we've already covered that basis, right? And we've also grounded that local elections are extremely important and how those maps are drawn, because it has a direct impact on your day-to-day life, and the fact that like Robeson County and areas have those successful redistricting reform stories. But let's step into what are types of gerrymandering so that you can say, okay, my community, I think there's a little bit of cracking going on here, or that looks a little bit like packing to me. There are elements of gerrymandering that we need to be aware of because it's different types. It's not just you were gerrymandered. There's a different type of gerrymandering. So cracking and packing. Okay. So cracking is really in the name. Cracking is cracking apart or spreading voters of one type, so one race, right? When we talk about Black districts or minority districts, or one party, so Democrats versus Republican versus Libertarian, the like, right? You take that group of folks and you crack them apart from one another and you cut them out and put them into different districts so that you are diluting their voting power. That's what happened in that District 12. If you are cracking apart students' power, and we also saw that with A&T University when that campus was split in half. When you crack apart that campus, it splits the body apart so that their power, their mobilization of 5,000 to 10,000 students are now in half, split in half and diluted. That's an example of cracking. You're cracking apart that power with those folks who are in proximity, okay? This will cause the voters of that party to become minorities in their district. This dilutes the voting power of these individuals. And so, okay, thank you. Oh, hey there, Senator Brian, thank you so much. The people are called Democrats on the party. I appreciate that. Okay, so as we're moving forward, looking at cracking for the Democratic Party or Republican parties, it can happen, right? Which holds that impact. So let's move forward from cracking. This is an example, and this is a picture, is of what does cracking actually look like, right? And thank you, Barbara, for elevating that up about Rouser and what happened in New Hanover. I appreciate that, and what's happening in Johnson County. So here's an example of that cracking style in Ohio. And so this is a very clear example of what it means to crack folks out of an area and dilute their power. This doesn't look right, right? When we're looking at this, you can see that it's not compact, and they're literally cutting pieces of folks in their areas, their neighborhoods out, and packing them into, cracking them, and then pushing them into that District 15. This is an example in Ohio and Franklin County of what it looks like to do a cracking style and crack apart, as you can see in that Franklin area. Okay, so after cracking, we're going into packing, okay? So packing is another example. It is the action of placing as many voters of one party in a single district, okay? It is, as you could imagine, cracking is cracking apart, packing is pushing in together, okay? It's just the opposite, but it can still be wielded as a tool to disenfranchise voters. Okay, so packing is the action of placing as many voters of one party in a single district. This minimizes the number of elections they can influence. That's the type of gerrymandering we saw at the top of the presentation when we discussed that Black Second, that district that they named the Black Second in the coastal communities and the northeastern communities of North Carolina. That is an example of packing to dilute power and to minimize influence. Again, I've already mentioned 12, but this is an example of packing certain communities into one single district to, again, dilute their power. So we've gone over cracking, we've gone over packing. Oh, hey, Wanda, good to have you on. So packing does sound like gentrification. Oh, okay. All right, look, we're getting to some conversation points that hopefully we can get into a little bit later if we have enough time. Okay, so we're gonna pause here for a moment. And what I would like for folks to do, and you may have already seen this exercise before, and if you have, great, you know, don't let others know the answer if you have, but please drop in the chat. First, it's going to be the answers, but I want you to drop in the chat or what you think the answer is. But first, the example here is, you know, what it would look like to have blue versus red parties, right? Blue versus red parties, and what it would mean to redistrict these areas. So this second, right here in the center, in the middle, I want folks to drop in the chat. Do you think this is an example of packing, cracking, or both? right here in the middle, packing, cracking, or both. And you already see the results here of who won the race, who won the districts. So you have 5 blue, 0 red, so blue wins. Do you think it is an example of packing, cracking, or both? Okay, I'm seeing some results coming in. Hey, Dr. Powell, good to have you on.
Hello, this is Otis.
Hey, Otis, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm enjoying your presentation, but I can't get my chat to work.
Okay. That is.
Somebody give me some pointers here.
Oh, sure, sure. And also, if it's easier to just say out loud, please feel free to come off mute like you're doing. And if you just want to give the answer even now, that's fine, because I'm not sure. I know Attorney Taylor and Reggie's helping us on the tech, and maybe they could help you with the chat. But if in the meantime, if you wanted to just say your answer, that's okay too.
Okay.
Okay. So we have, I see someone said neither. Ooh, bold. Okay, so I see both. I see packing. Okay, so I see the majority is packing, and we have the second being both. And so if you did choose packing, you are correct. You are correct, okay? And so the question is here, who was packed, right? Who was packed and how did that look? And so again, this is an interactive conversation. And so let me see if there's another. Yeah, somebody celebrated. So yeah, so you're seeing that when you look at the packing, yes, we could technically say that the red was cracked apart. We could technically say that. However, the blue was packed in a way that gave them the advantage, right? So it wasn't drawn in a way that allowed for the red to have its own separate districts that was representative of the amount of squares that it had. But we see the packing actually taking place as it pertains to the blue districts. So this party took the opportunity to create an advantage for its blue party. So the blue obviously was in power, more like, legislative power. We'll see this as a congressional map for right now. But obviously they were able to do what they needed to do to pack that blue in a way that made sure to pack the power in a district and overpower the red in their districts. Okay, last one. This one over here, a little bit more complicated, y'all. Looks like a puzzle. So is it packing, cracking, or both?
You're talking about the third chart, okay.
Yes, sir. Packing, cracking, or both?
Okay, I would say that one is both.
Okay, Mr. Otis, appreciate the answer. Hey, Monefe. Hey, Miss Betty. Okay, I've seen a lot of both coming in. Okay, Mr. Otis, I feel like you're leading the charge here. I see some people saying cracking. Okay. So I see cracking. Okay, so I see cracking. I see both. Oh, I see both. Okay. Still coming through. Excellent. Okay, so I appreciate y'all. Oh, the answers are still coming in. I don't want to cut folks off. So I'll count down in my own head from 5 if there's more answers coming in. Okay, so if you said both, you are correct. If you said both, you are correct. Mr. Otis, you're on point. So if you said both, you are correct. So this
I'm coming off mute to ask you why. Good evening, everybody.
Hey, Dr. Powell.
Overachievers want to know why they're wrong.
I'll Griggs. You're so funny. It's good to have you on. I'll explain why, Dr. Powell. So it's both cracking and packing. And why is because, and this is how we saw North Carolina, right? So when you become, unfortunately, like what we saw Thomas Hoffeller, which was the individual who was responsible for gerrymandering us to the degree that which we did, you as a map maker become really an expert at how to crack and pack and utilize both of those tools in order to dilute the power, but to keep. So here we go. So you're looking at the red, right? And you're looking at how the red lives in that district. And really, we need to look at what does it mean to be compact. But in this moment, they didn't do compactness. So what they did was they cracked expert. If you look to the right, and I don't know if folks can see my cursor, but if not, if you look to the right where the blue is, they cracked and created a box, right? The little square, the corners, to crack apart the blue, to dilute those top, 6, I'll say at the very top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares of the blue. They cracked them. And then they pushed them into the district with red, right? And so you only have 4 blue in with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red. So of course it gives the advantage to the red. The red, what they did was they cracked apart, right, parts of the red in order to pull them together, or pack them, excuse me, they packed the red together, cracked the blue apart, and put them into a district so that the red would have the advantage from being packed, but the blue would be disadvantaged from being cracked. And that's how they were able to dilute the blue. They cracked the blue apart and then packed the red in these districts to give them more power from being packed. Dr. Powell, did I explain that plain language enough? Was that good?
Yeah, you explained it well. I'm just gonna have to go over it again.
Yeah, okay,
and count them block by block.
Yeah.
But what I am seeing is that in addition, well, what can I say? It's more powerful than just eyeballing it, because you got to count. You really have to look at, like you explained it, look at the numbers of red versus blue.
That's right.
And to get it. It's just almost demonic.
Wow. I like how you described it, but you're spot on, Dr. Powell. And it really is looking at your Black voting age population, taking in that numbers. That's why the population numbers from the census is really important, because that's what gives you your data and your population to know who is where, and your Black voting age and population, and to know how those districts should be set up. And Wanda Gilbert Coker on the line really brought a good point that I won't deviate into, but I do want to lift it for food for thought, is when she mentioned gentrification, this is also how this is how we do zoning. I do want to put that in there. So redistricting is really, we're talking about in purposes of voting maps, but when you do zoning maps, that same cracking and packing applies to your communities. And that's why food deserts can be created. That's why medical deserts can be created. So zoning, and I appreciate you, Wanda, for saying that, because that is also another way that this tactic of cracking and packing is used on Black communities in a different way. Okay, so this is what's unfamiliar. And I think I only have a few minutes, so I want to make sure that I'm getting to the issue. Okay, Tamika, what would be the fair way to divide these districts? So it's to Dr. Powell's point, right? So you really have to take your Black voting, and we're talking about Black and brown voting. So that's why I'm saying take your Black voting age population, but you can only get that population from the census. This year, we have a delay, right? Because of COVID. And so generally we would have gotten that census, our local elected leaders would get that census data at the top of this year, around March, okay? But now because of pandemic, it's pushed it back to September. But usually that population data comes in, your leaders get that data for the school board, for the county commissioners, for the city council, again, to your legislators, for your legislative, your congressional, they get that data and they're able to look at that data and say, okay, this is how my community should be district. This is how it should be divided. This is who should be remaining together. So you have to really look at that data, right? And be careful when you're looking at legislation that wants to do data exclusion. You have to be very careful with that language, because if we are not having that data, if that data isn't available, number one, we can't actually find out where our people need to be. And number two, it's harder to prove when someone discriminates against us if we technically don't exist. That's why the census is extremely important and why our communities have to be counted, right? It's for that political representation. And so that's some information, but it's more, but it definitely is based around that data and having community and trusted representatives working together, those public comment periods. So you're able as a community to give the feedback to your electeds to say, hey, my home was district out of this district. I've been here for years. Why did you cut my house out? Those conversations are important to have, but you have to know that you've been cracked or packed. So what you're learning here today and what you're learning through this training will help you be able to have those tools in your tool belt, if you don't already, to say, I think I've been packed. I think I've been cracked. What can we do to remedy this in this map during your public hearing process? And so, okay, And so when, oh, thank you, Michael. That's awesome. Where's this information been all my life? Been registering voters to get out the vote for about 40 years, performing these activities at 4 states and a Navy ship. Deep honor to you in just your services country. First of all, I am a former military spouse, Air Force, and deep military family. So thank you for your service. I definitely want to say that. So hijacking and kidnapping. Oftentimes we don't hear this in the media, but this is what happens to your elected representatives. So when we're protecting our Black electeds and our brown electeds, and we're saying, okay, you know, we got to keep you in office, we need to re-elect you, or we need representation, we have to be careful that they're not being targeted for literally a term called kidnapping. And that means moving a popular incumbent or candidate out of his or her or their base district into a new unfamiliar district with the opposing party. And so that can happen. So if the party who's in power determines that, hey, this person's too popular, or I need to dilute their power, or I want to make sure this seat is open for my party, they can cut out that popular incumbent by cutting out their house and the district where they live and put it in the next district. They can kidnap that person. That's why they use that term. The incumbent, of course, we know the impact. The person won't be known in this new district, and they will more than likely lose because that's not their constituents. That's not their home base. We know the impact. It's obvious, but the incumbent is kidnapped from their reliable voter base, and in turn, reliable voters are kidnapped from their favorite incumbent. And so that's some of the things that we need to be aware of, that it's not just an opportunity for us to be gerrymandered as a population, but also our representatives can be gerrymandered. Okay, so we have to keep all eyes. This is an example. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, I followed his case for years and was extremely excited when we had him give comment this year at the summit, at the North Carolina Black Summit. And so years ago, as a new up-and-coming favorite candidate, Congressman Jeffries, who wasn't a congressman yet at that time, he was kidnapped from his home district by a former incumbent. And they were in the same party. And so this can happen. You know, the same party can do it to one another, just like the opposing party. In this case, it was a fellow party member did this to him. It was an incumbent who did this to him. And so voters were taken by surprise at the polls when his name was no longer on the ballot. And it was actually interviews of the folks who were showing up to polls, and they were saying they were shocked. They were like, where did his name go? There were no warnings given that when they would show up at the ballot box that day, Congressman Jeffries would not be on that ballot. So they don't have to give a warning either, by the way. So he was kidnapped. And so he lost that race, obviously. But don't worry, he went on and was able to become a congressman. So we know that the story is a success story. But that is an example of kidnapping. Hijacking, that is the other term, right? So we had for the people, cracking and packing. For our electeds, it's kidnapping and hijacking. Hijacking is the action of drawing a district to contain 2 or more incumbents from the same party. Okay, so you're hijacking, again, it's pretty self-explanatory, the action of drawing a district to contain 2 or more incumbents from the same party. So this places 2 candidates of that same party in direct competition with each other. So no longer are they able to run for their respective district. I'll just use numbers as an example. These numbers are not real, it's just for an analogy. If you have a district for District 1, a candidate for District 1 and a candidate for District 2, and then all of a sudden the party in power is like, no, we want to eliminate both of these people. Let's just do one big District 1 and put them both in it together. And then they have to run against one another, which of course, effectively, the people can only vote for one candidate, right? And so that eliminates having 2 Black candidates or 3 Black candidates who actually can successfully achieve 2 to 3 Black offices. And us having representation is now only 1 Black or brown person, 1 Black or brown candidate. And so that's an example of hijacking. And this process eliminates at least 1 candidate from the opposing party. It's all about that party control when it comes to hijacking. So that's your 2. This is an example of Congressman Jeffries' home being kidnapped, by the way. This is literally what they did to his house, y'all. This was the district, and they cut out his house away from the district. The whole district, all they had to do was cut out the block around his home. And he was now in this district here. That is how, it's just that simple. Okay, so I'm going to start going into wind down, but I want to make sure we're touching base on 2 things. 1, the issues that I mentioned, so that we're ready for the next training that I know Reggie will, walk us through and talk to us more about. But I do want to give an update. So the timeline of redistricting, so for local electeds and folks on, there may be more updates that you can inform me on. And if there are, please drop in the chat, because I want to make sure that my presentation is updated for folks that I'm in conversation with, but to know what you all are handling in this moment. So I invite that information. Some of the timeline for redistricting. So prior to the pandemic, decennial census data are generally released to states by March 31st of the year. So I already stated this, that we usually get the census data in March, right? But for us, because of the pandemic, it was announced on February 12th by the US Census Bureau that it would deliver this data to the states by September 30th. That is super late, y'all. And we know that you all are handling municipal elections. What does that mean in terms of keeping them this year, moving them this next year, or resources, right? Filing deadlines. So this is the impact that's happening because of the census data being delayed, the pandemic, and also the previous administration had some things to do with that delay as well. I do want to name that. But we do know that the apportionment data came through, and we did gain a new seat in the U.S. House. And so we have 14 seats. Formerly, of course, we had 13, but because we have nearly new 1 million residents, and most of those 1 million are split between Raleigh, Charlotte, and Greensboro, more urban areas, but there are populations that have moved to rural areas as well, but the concentration is in the capital and other metropolitan cities. But we have had an increase in 1 million new residents, y'all. So local governments today, and Attorney Holmes, I really want to say thank you for keeping me abreast of what's happening today. And so just thinking about this, right? Local governments. So today, Senate Bill 722, please look this up, was heard in committee and passed. This bill, if passed into law, will allow municipalities to conduct research and pull data directly after receiving the federal decennial census information. So after they receive the receipt of just getting the census data, they have a limited time period to conduct research to say, is there a big population imbalance? Is there a big population shift? Have I had a lot of new people come in or a lot of people leave? And if that data speaks to that major population shift, right, and that data proves that it's substantially imbalanced, then the determination of holding elections can be pushed to next year. Right? So it's about that data. This bill talks about do the research and let us know if your populations are imbalanced. Or do you have more folks than you realize? Do you have less folks because of the last census? And are you sure you can legally hold your elections this year? Here's the thing. If you're doing the data, there's two things I did elevate it here. Let me see. Yep. With this, there's some elements. Okay, and thank you, Senator Bryan. No info yet on rescheduling local elections, probably only happening with local bills, no statewide postponement as of this time. Thank you for that update. And so here's the two elements, still talking with attorneys, still making sure that we're up to date on this, but here's two elements about this bill that will hold impact for our folks that are, local electeds who are leading this process. The governing body or the local electeds will need to adopt a resolution to delay elections. So if they find that the population is imbalanced, that is so significant that they can't legally hold their next election using the current districts, if they realize that the maps are too old because the population is imbalanced, then they have to adopt a resolution to delay those elections. That is what is mentioned in this bill. The governing body will be required to afford ample opportunities for public input. There is no definitive for community members. That could mean that your local governing body can determine to do a public hearing or some other form of public input, but they still have to get your public input if that data, if they go for a resolution to delay those elections. Okay, so I do want to elevate that for folks here. Okay, cool. And so there's, okay. And then for communities, here's the benefit, and here's some elements I want folks to be aware of, right? This bill, and this isn't the benefit in this one, this bill leaves a potential open door for district cities with significant population changes, where there's more population or less, to hold an election that would violate the 14th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act. So it does kind of leave an open door, right, for people to go on and do their elections, which could violate the Voting Rights Act. But here's the offset for us as community members, as advocates, as litigators. We can use that data that they're required to pull. Remember, they have to pull data to show if their population is imbalanced. That data is now proof. If they do discriminate against us, we can use that data to sue them if the district is bad. So I just want to elevate that. And so that's a kind of a balance in that moment. And thank you, Attorney Holmes, for dropping that in there. So those are some elements. And I know local electeds are navigating whether to hold elections this year or next, and what does that look like? But again, we saw in the chat feedback from our electeds who are saying what they're dealing with and what's going on in this moment. But I wanted to elevate that. Okay, last thing, and then I'll pause here. the intersection of our issues and redistricting. This is the issue component that is my favorite to talk about. Remember, I mentioned communities of interest. This is where we get this term out of our toolbox, okay? We're talking about issues. All of our communities, there's something that we are dealing with, right? There's something that we are facing. Where I'm from, I grew up and I almost worked at a poultry plant, y'all. I'm rural, I'm country, y'all. I may do what I do now, but I grew up a very ag, very sustainable, showed horses and dairy goats, very country. And so I almost worked at a poultry plant. And a lot of our family members who worked in this poultry plant was unfortunately coming out of that plant with illnesses because the work conditions were awful. So not only was it hurting their joints because it was too cold, it was no provisions in there that would assist them or OSHA protections that would protect them from just adverse work conditions. So they were coming out with really bad, we call it, the coop, where they would come out with lung issues because they were breathing in really cold air and chemical contaminants. This is a part of the issue that still faces our community, but that was a poultry plant that I almost worked at as a youth before my mom and my family was like, no, you need to go on to school and do what you need to do to pull your people and be with your people to fight against the kind of atrocities that our folks are facing. Those are some of the issues that I want to elevate. That's my own personal experience, but there are issues in our communities that we're facing now for our folks. But how do we connect those to redistricting and how can we address them? We've already seen this map at the top of the presentation, again, just to have that image in our brains so we can see the intersection of these gerrymanders. So this right here that we're looking at is a map, a study that I conducted a few years ago with a person who could do GIS. So I contracted a GIS person, and this is a part of my study. And I wanted to prove that these gerrymanders also supported really dirty corporations that have been making our people sick. I wanted to prove it, so I did. And so this is what this research is. I took these former congressional districts, the ones we already spoke about, that Congressional District 12, all of the Eastern North Carolina gerrymandering impacts, and I started to put pollution points. So up by Northampton County, the compressor station that was up through there, I appreciate Chester Williams being on because that was something his community was fighting, and Miss Belinda Joyner and some other folks up through there who were fighting against that pipeline. But that compressor station was a blast zone. It could explode at any minute and impact the community as we know it. They were planning to put a pipeline up through there. This is a pipeline that I worked to defeat with many other advocates, and we won. My previous office, we filed a lawsuit, a Title VI, to stop them from putting this pipeline in Black and brown communities because they were using our communities to do it. But they were about to put this pipeline, guess what? Directly through the east, all the way through the squiggly gerrymandered district. These are the same districts, by the way, that have the most Black and Native American population in the entire state because it's the Black Belt, but it also is the largest Native American population east of the Mississippi. And this is where they were going to put that pipeline, by the way. And by the way, that pipeline had been moved 3 times. It was supposed to go through the capital, but they didn't leave it there. They were going to put it through the east. So we then added coal ash and liquefied natural gas. We start seeing all these pollution points pop up. Look at District 12. Look at how these pollution sources start to follow the district. So even though they're employers and offer some jobs, these were also areas that was creating a lot of illnesses and diseases in our communities. And then boom, these are not all the pollution sites, but this purple that just exploded is animal feeding operations, not farms, not small family farms. Like I said, I come from a long line of farmers. This is not farming. This is large corporate industries like Smithfield and those kind of big confinement facilities, right? And poultry plants. So it was showing, okay, where are they? And it exploded in the east. And of course, in the area with the gerrymanders, even going towards the Piedmont Triad, they were matching almost perfectly. The gerrymanders and really dirty corporations. Now, why do we care about that? What is the impact? Hey, Nakia, good to have you on. What is the impact? Why does it matter that our issues of being environmentally contaminated and working in these places that don't offer health insurance coverage, that we can't get fair workers' rights, that our people are coming out with illnesses or, dirty air, which creates asthma and lung and bronchial issues? What's the impact? Well, guess what, y'all? The same people, this is a part of my research, the same people who gerrymandered us and did racial discriminatory, those racial 28 districts that was found racially guilty, those same elected officials who we now couldn't vote out because they were gerrymandered in, They received over $200,000 in campaign donations from Smithfield and other large corporations. And then they went on, had the nerve to pass farm bills. Now, farm bills, they sound good, but they're not good. Oh, and I think somebody needs to go on mute. I'm sorry. Thank you. These farm bills, guess what they did? Farm Bill 467 and 711, Duplin County elected officials were responsible, and I want to pause it. Hey, Reggie, Attorney Taylor, you mind helping them out with mute for a minute? Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, so Farm Bill 467. So they were responsible for the original gerrymandering committee, but they also sponsored this bill, which stopped residents from being able to sue this corporation for damages up to a certain point. It stopped us from being able to sue. And I really want to give honor to elder and now ancestor, Miss Elsie Herring, who just passed a few weeks ago. She was a giant in the East, fighting for her community and for her mama and other folks against this very corporation. And she passed away, and it was due to pancreatic cancer. And she's usually in most of my PowerPoints, because I like to give honor to living legends. And so this is a part of that fight, as we've been losing some of our advocates, but I couldn't skip over just giving her honor. But these farm bills impacted folks like her from being able to sue corporations for, you know, again, justice and restoration for their lands, for their homes, and for their bodies. So what we're seeing is, and I'll send this over to you, we'll be able to look at these bills a little bit closer, and you'll be able to look at them. But the same folks who gerrymandered us, the same folks who couldn't vote out because now they were gerrymandered, were the same folks who received campaign dollars from the corporations, which then are the same folks that created farm bills to protect those corporations that has been a detriment to our people. That's where the issues connect, y'all. So if we're not looking at redistricting, and there's a reason that they have separated us from voting and redistricting. I appreciate Michael Jackson, who said earlier about you've been doing voting for so long, and your work and the amount of like just devotion to the people to get voting. There's a reason they haven't told us about redistricting. It's because they want to separate us from that part. Like we see this, why, and our local electeds, we have to support our Black and brown local electeds because this is what they're doing, you know, every 10 years. And they don't always get the support, the resources they need. But there's a reason that they don't tell us about redistricting, because they don't want to know us about this power building part that we're left out of, that sometimes entrenches certain corporations and people to do us really wrong and not give us the jobs we need, but also not give us the health support we need. And so this is just another example of an elected, electeds that you'll see in my PowerPoint of the folks who sponsored these farm bills, but we're also in the gerrymandering communities. We know that Black communities are the most, we are 65% more likely to live 2 miles away from a toxic waste zone in the entire nation. We are more likely than any other race of folks. Second being the Latinx community to have our grounds used as dumping grounds. And live only 2 miles away from a toxic waste zone. We see this in Chester Road, Roseboro, North Carolina, a landfill behind the swine operations. It has impacted the land and how we could grow our food. It's contaminated soil and has given people certain levels of cancer and issues because it's all contaminated because they use our areas as a landfill. Well, how did it get redistricted that way? Even local zoning, how did that happen? And where are the representatives that are, you know, I know they're working local electeds, there's certain folks who are working really hard, but we have to look at what's happening on these congressional levels that is helping our communities be targeted for being dumped on. I want to give honor to, again, heroes, Euless Willis from Navassa community. And so just talking about the impact and the legacy that Navassa has had, they have some of the highest federal Superfund sites than any other municipality in the state. This is what they're dealing with and fighting against, and folks having so much cancer and kidney problems more than normal because their area has been used as a dumping ground because, again, these certain corporations are supported depending on how it is being redistricted. So you'll see in my slide, I won't go through all of these, but you'll see actual like data points of, you know, how many hogs, the people there are, the impact it holds on certain communities. So when we're talking about communities of interest, if Sampson and Duplin County, Duplin's #1 in the nation and Sampson's #2. And I know there's some folks from Duplin, Sampson on this call, and appreciate y'all so much. If you are 1 and 2 in the nation, then you have a rare impact that other folks don't have because there's more hogs than people. So that means your representative needs more resources to help make sure the people are healthy. it means that your local electeds need more resources from the budget to make sure that there's more hospitals, that there's more adequate health care and health insurance coverage, that OSHA protections is extended to your franchise and corporation workers. That boils down to who you can vote in. And if you are gerrymandered, you definitely can't vote in who could be the best person to solve those problems and advocate for you to get the budget that you need to clean up this mess. And so that's a big part of redistricting. So you'll see a lot of the food deserts I talk about here, urban heat islands, air pollution, and even PFAS, which is a chemical that was spilled in the Cape Fear River, y'all. It was spilled in the Cape Fear River by DuPont. My great uncle actually retired from DuPont. And so they spilled this chemical into the Cape Fear River, and it has poisoned over 1 million of our people who live along the Cape Fear River Neuse. It has poisoned the water. It's been in the water. It's in your bloodstream. If you live along that water, I don't want to be a jarring, but these are some of the elements that we need to address that right now, you know, North Carolina Black Alliance, we have 3 lawsuits against the federal government, calling them to task for not prioritizing cleanup in our areas. We are actively involved in suing them because we know that we can't talk about voting. We can't talk about building political power if our people are sick and dying. So that's why it's coupled. But you'll see more information on this. And I appreciate warriors like Nakia Smith, who's on, and other folks from Fayetteville, Cumberland County, New Hanover County, NAACP, Ms. Deborah Maxwell. I appreciate all those folks who have been tested and been fighting the good fight to push back against this chemical. So I'll pause here. I've already given you some examples of impact that redistricting can have on your communities, everything from gentrification, as Wanda Gilbert Coker mentioned, to barriers to getting disaster aid if a hurricane comes through. We already know that impact. And so these are just some examples, but I will actually pause here and would love to hear if there are more examples from folks of what is facing your community and what can you see, as I gave an example of how you could tie in like environmental issues. I also tied in workers' rights. What else do you think redistricting can hold an impact on for you locally? And I'd love to hear that. And I see a question from Don Cornelius. Who is the elected official who made that statement? I'm so tired of Republicans are excused for their actions. So what I'll do, because technically I'm wearing my C3 hat today, when you receive the slide deck, you'll be able to look at that link, Don, and it'll show you exactly who made that statement. And you'll be able to see, but it is somebody who is in charge as far as elected for Duplin area, Duplin County. And Nakia, I appreciate your framing. I think the better question is, what doesn't it affect? Yep. Dr. Powell, I think housing, trying to time what Ms. Coker said. You were absolutely right. You were absolutely right. And so let's talk about that housing for a minute. And Dr. Powell and Wanda Gilbert Coker, you know, Wanda, I know you're a deep housing advocate and definitely would like to invite you for these last, I'd say 3 minutes, you know, definitely feel free to come off mute. But when we're talking about, you know, housing and gentrification, we're also looking at how we are locally redistricted in a way that moves our people out of their areas. And how does that support or neglect the community, and how can we impede gentrification? And we've seen that with heirs property. We've seen that with how communities eminent domain. And so this is different elements of redistricting in a different way, but it does still come across the desk of your local governing bodies, whether it's the zoning office, whether it's the transportation office. These are still being activated. How are they drawing your maps? And once you learn how to draw maps here in this space, like you're learning like the cracking, the packing, you could also use that same analysis for maps when looking at your transportation routes. Where are they building that new bus route? How are they creating new developments? And is it affordable housing? Is the AMI, is the median income actually representative of the community? And so those same zoning maps, they're really duplicative. And so you can definitely use that, Dr. Powell, to help support one or the other to get that fair map you need. And so I'll pause here and just deeply appreciate, again, you all for having me. And I appreciate the journey that we have kind of gone together. And thank you so much for being so active in the chat as well. Deeply appreciative for that. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out. Reggie and Attorney Taylor will share the slide deck. And again, thank you again for having me. And it's just been a pleasure. So Reggie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, LA, for that just rich grounding in all these levels of gerrymandering, and especially the terms. I'm going to say this now, and then I'll say it again at the end because I already know people have the question, and you've heard it already. We will be sharing every resource from this presentation today. So that includes the video of this conversation, along with the slide deck. We'll also be putting together kind of a 1 or 2 pager around with some of these terms and some of the kind of litigation and legislation that was discussed today as well. So you will be receiving all of this. We'll also be posting it on the website. So just want you to know that is coming, and you'll get that by Friday. What we want to do as well, as we have kind of talked about, again, over the course of these 4 sessions, by the end of June, you will have, if you stick with us during that whole time, you will have gotten some more skills around how to monitor these processes at your local level. And then there were already some questions in the chat about how do I do this where I am. We are moving you toward that. To get us there, what we want to do is begin to practice in these trainings of having you talk to each other. Eventually, by that last session, we will be breaking you up into, to the extent that we can do it, breaking you up into actual county clusters so that you can begin to kind of form an action plan here. But right now, we want you to just kind of begin that process of talking to each other. So I'm going to ask, so what we're going to do is this. Let me share a slide, just so you know kind of what's coming. Just a minute. So we're going to have you break out into small groups for about 15 minutes. And we just want you to discuss kind of what resonated with you in this presentation. We focused a lot on gerrymandering specifically. So, you know, to the extent that you are aware, do you live in a gerrymandered district? And how has that impacted your ability to hold elected officials accountable? And what solutions to end gerrymandering are you in favor of? These are going to be self-directed. We don't have facilitators in these particular sessions. And so what you're going to need to do at the beginning of the session is identify someone to kind of take notes and be the person to report back. Again, you'll spend 15 minutes. For those of you who haven't done this before, these breakout sessions will be kind of automatically timed. So after 15 minutes, it will bring you back into the main group. So you really don't need to do anything. It'll bring you right back. And then we'll have a little time of report back and then kind of close with some call to actions. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then ask Yolanda, is there anything else we need to know in terms of the process for breakouts?
Hey everyone, great and rich and deep discussion today. Thank you so much to Lamisha Whittington. We are going to break out, as Reggie stated. He showed you the slide with the various prompts. I also dropped those prompts into the chat. Again, all these prompts are based on your own personal stories that connect to the historical connections that you heard today. Again, you can take a screenshot of the chat. I don't know if this chat will carry over into the breakout rooms, but just talk about, do you live or have you lived in a gerrymandering district again, and how has that impacted your ability to hold elected officials accountable, and what solutions are you in favor of? So when you go into breakouts, there's going to be 11 breakout rooms. I'm going to assign you automatically. Choose someone to be the scriber or the note taker, and then choose someone to report out. You're gonna have 15 minutes. I will broadcast, your timer in your breakout room, but I will bring you back after 15 minutes, and the person that you selected to report out will report out for your group. All right, so let me create these rooms. I'm gonna open all the rooms. So look on your screen because you're gonna get a little message. And when you see that message pop up, you need to click on it so you can go into your breakout room. You should see something, let's see. Okay, do you see it? You get an invite. And yeah, you got it. Okay, some of you have not got into your breakout room yet. Let's see, how many people are still out? Coming back, and yep, so everyone should be back by now. So I definitely would like to have as quick as a conversation as we can, but I still want it to be meaningful. So I'm gonna choose rooms, and then when I call your group number or room number, then you can, whoever is the assigned speaker can speak. So group number 1, please tell me, who's your leader, group number 1? Who's the reporter, I should say.
I guess that'll be me, Janet Barnes.
Hi, Ms. Barnes. So can you tell me like maybe 2, maybe 3 sentences, like what your group talked about?
We talked about the lack of knowledge, of not understanding the redistricting and the impact. Also, we talked about the importance of making sure our people understand this, because the legislatures will have public hearings. And so you need to be able to go up there and speak your piece. And it's those type of things we talked about. And then secondly, I told them about, I was one of the ones that sued our lines that were drawn for the county commissioners at the last time, and we won, and we went back to the original county commissioner district because they had drawn super districts and stuff. And so we were able to be successful, went all the way up to the federal court, and I was one of the ones along with Commissioner West that testified, and we won. So we got to get on the wall early and make sure we understand the cause and the effect of this redistricting.
So true, that's great. Thank you for sharing. And I know you guys were having some great discussions in the various rooms. So room number 2, or group 2, who's your leader that's going to report out?
I guess I am. This is Otis Jordan. I'm non-video.
That's okay.
Okay. We talked about the packing of our districts and I'm having trouble trying to remember exactly, but I guess what I'll do is just kind of talk about some of the things we talked about rather than kind of go back on what we talked about. That is what I think we got to the point of is a common denominator for all of this great information and knowledge that people have, like the presenter earlier. But it's so much, like the lady earlier was talking about, is understanding things because it's really kind of complicated, it's involved. And so I was thinking that the best way that we could do is follow a common, reduce it to a common denominator. And to me, that common denominator is democracy, because this is what we're talking about redistricting and gerrymandering. It's anti-democratic, it's anti-democracy. And it's against the Constitution as far as I am concerned, because the lady earlier was talking about one man, but one vote. So when you rule out the one man, one vote and pick your voters, then you're violating the Constitution. And so, and you're attacking democracy, you're destroying democracy when you violate the Constitution. You know, we have a great Constitution. Of course, it could have some work, but regardless, it's still great. And we have to take advantage of the Constitution, because there are a lot of people who cry it's unconstitutional when it favors them. And then when we want the constitutional consideration, like First Amendment, then we don't get our constitutional rights. So I'm saying that we work toward the Constitution and democracy, And everything that we're talking about gerrymandering and what to do, all of that points to, that's the common denominator, that democracy and the Constitution is the common denominator that everything can rally around.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Jordan, for those great solutions. And I didn't hear real quick, do you live in a gerrymandering district?
I lived in a PAC district. I live
PAC district. Okay, that's right.
Yeah, G.K. Butterfield's district.
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you so much. Group 2, Group 3, can we hear your reports?
I'm not sure what our group number is, but I can report on our group since it's one of the 2 remaining.
Our group was number 6, Michael.
Oh,
yeah, number 6.
I'm glad somebody remembered that.
Well, that's okay. I'm not hearing from group 2, and maybe we'll just take 2 more. So do you want to go ahead and report for group 6, Michael?
I'm group 3.
Okay, you're group 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey,
I thought I don't know. We talked about so many things. You know, I'm not sure. I live in Cumberland County, and I feel like I'm in a packed area. But there was one lady that was on, and I can't remember her name. She was from Robertson County. There she is.
Cheryl. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's Cheryl. Cheryl's gonna speak because I thought she had a great example of you know, how
I didn't know I was on mute. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
What we're saying
Cheryl.
is that we need to educate the community more as to what is going on politically, because they just don't understand. And I gave an example of talking to a person about the census, and I said, you know, the census actually impacts the redistricting, and wanted to know, what are you talking about? And I said, the data that they get from it helps with the redistricting. So did you answer the census? No, I ain't answer that. They too nosy for me. And then you've got to go through this whole spiel about why it isn't nosiness, it's actually helping you. So my question was, now when they redraw those lines and you don't like it, what is your argument going to be? Because you wouldn't answer the census. Now, what they did to us in Robeson County, they redrew lines, and we lost Representative Garland Pierce, who was a great asset to us because he was doing a whole lot of things, as well as keeping us apprised of what was going on and what we needed to pay attention. At the same time, they took a very far corner of Robeson County and put into Columbus County, which made us be represented by Brendan Jones, who, by the way, did not want to have any conversation with us when we went up. I can't remember if it was D9 days at the Capitol or Delta days at the Capitol. But when our group went to his office, the door was locked and the curtains were pulled, and he was nowhere in sight. Now, mind you, he knew we were coming, but he chose not to talk to us. So we are up against that type thing. Then when he comes into being, as everybody's asking, who is this person? Well, you're realizing that he knows nothing about us, and we don't know anything about him. I almost said a bad word, which would have been appropriate.
It sounds like we're saying that
that's what's happening in Robeson County.
Yeah.
I wonder if they think that Robeson County has gotten too impactful, that we have gotten too big for our pants. So we're going to make sure that we divide you all up where you won't have any power, and you won't put people in that are going to be combative and not go along with the program. So that's sort of where we are. You all know about Robeson County. That's where we are.
Well, so your group definitely has to say that you believe you live in a gerrymandered district, you lost a local elected champion, and it sounds like you were saying your solution is educating people about the census and just educating people about this.
Definitely.
Okay.
About any political thing. They just need to know, because when you talk with them, you find out that they don't know or nor understand what is happening. They're just told by Mr. Charlie, some of them. I'm not saying all of us, but some of them are still in those old ways where Mr. Charlie tells you, you need to vote for so-and-so and so. So when they go to the voting booth, Mr. Charlie said so that this is a good man, so this is who I'm gonna vote for, or else dollars have been spread around. And my thing with the dollars is they may pay you $500 or $5,000, but against what you're going to be going against for the next how many years, how long does that $5,000 really last you, and has it benefited you anything?
Yeah, that's so true. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm being told I got to wind things down. So I'm going to go to one more group, and that's going to be Michael's group, group 6. But I'm encouraging everyone to just drop your feelings and what you discuss in the chat, if you don't mind. So group 6, Michael, do you live in a gerrymandering district? What has impacted your ability to hold elected officials accountable, and what solutions are you in favor of?
Oh boy, those are 3 questions. And you're asking a guy who's barely lived here a year in this state. I can speak to what our committee members discussed. Mary, I don't remember where she lives, but Mary and we talked about that our big takeaway was we have heard about redistricting basically ever since we could vote, but the graphics presented during this, the lady's name did most presentation, really gave us a sense of what it really is. And there were different types of ways that one party can try to do things to their advantage as compared to other parties. One group, member of our group, a guy named Byron, he has lived it in real life as I guess a recent graduate of NCA&T State University, and that when they redistricted that area, they actually divided the university in half, which spoke to Lamisha's, that's right, her presentation about diluting of the vote. And he spoke to what the students did to try to not let that happen. So those were the things that we discussed and our takeaways from her presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jackson. And thanks to everyone who's sharing in the chat. And it just seems like, the consensus is that the majority of the folks who took part in this session believe that they live in gerrymandering districts, and that some solutions should be education. Now, so at this point, I'm going to pitch this back to Reggie Weaver. I do thank you guys. I know this has been a lengthy call during the evening, probably doing dinner. So thank you for being a part of this and sticking around for the breakout room session. Giving it back to you, Reggie.
All right, everyone. So again, thank you all for sticking with us. This time, we do schedule this call for about 2 hours, and so we're right at the end. And so thank you for sticking right down to the end of the line. I just want to kind of just remind you about a couple of things. So we do have more trainings coming up, as I've mentioned. I will kind of show you the dates for those. And just remind you again that we will be sharing these resources. You will receive links to these by email. We'll also be posting those on our website. So if you, let's say you missed the first session and you'd like access to those, you can go to the Code Red website. So if you look at that website right at the bottom of this slide, ncblackalliance.org/code-red, you will be able to find and access the information from session 1. So we actually will not be meeting for the next 2 weeks. We will come back with these sessions on Wednesday, June the 9th at the same time. Lamisha set us up very well for this next session. That's one where we will be exploring the intersections of redistricting and the way that it impacts specific policy issues that impact us on a daily basis. That format will be more of a panel discussion. So we'll have someone speaking from kind of the state level and what that's looked like. We'll also have representatives from Rocky Mountain, some of the work that they've done as well. so that we can kind of get both the state and kind of a very local perspective on both the impact and also how communities have fought to address that issue in their communities. And then on session 4, that's the one again where we're kind of getting more into some skill building. All of this again, we are hoping that by the time you have finished these 4 sessions, you've been equipped both with kind of the historic background and some tools to really become effective monitors of the map drawing process, particularly locally. And so that's a conversation where we hope that you'll come. I know several people again in the chat have already asked, what can I do? How can I do this in my county? Those 2 sessions in particular will help you to kind of know how to approach that work. So we hope to see you there.